Last time we assembled the pistons, now we're installing them. First, we want to make sure the cylinder walls and bearing journals are clean. Contamination can lead to damage between surfaces when installing the components. We want to take our piston assembly and make sure that the piston rings are clocked. Manufacturers specify which orientation they want the gaps of each ring with respect to each other to be, so make sure to check the guidelines for your specific assembly. Now we add oil to the rings and piston compressor tool in order to protect the components and make installation easier. Put the piston in the ring compressor tool and begin to tighten the tool. Make sure that the piston doesn't spin, otherwise it'll mess up the orientation of the rings and you'll need to reclock them. Also make sure to turn the crankshaft so that the piston that you're installing is at bottom dead center to avoid any contact when installing. In this case, we need to pay attention to the orientation of the piston itself. It's not symmetrical and the intake valve cutouts are actually larger than the exhaust valve cutouts. Using something soft like wood, we can tap the piston into the cylinder. This shouldn't take too much force, and if something feels like it's stuck, take the piston out and start over. The piston rings can get caught and using too much force will cause them to snap. Now we push the piston into the cylinder. At the same time, guide the connecting rod so it mates up nicely with the crankshaft instead of hitting it. We'll be using plastic gauge again to make sure the oil clearance between the crankshaft and connecting rod are proper. For a more in-depth explanation of how plastic gauge works and why we use it, take a look at the crankshaft installation video. In my previous video, I had some questions on why lubrication was applied to the fasteners before we torqued them. At first it may seem counterintuitive to lubricate something that will be holding our assembly together, and you may think this can cause the fasteners to back out, but this ensures that the proper torque is applied. If we look at the assembly, there's a required clamping force we need to make sure that it doesn't come apart during operation. The clamping force is found by T equals K times D times P, where T is the applied torque, K is the friction constant, D is the bolt diameter, and P is the clamping force. If we hold the diameter constant, we can see an increase in the friction constant will decrease the clamping force despite applying the same torque. This is an extremely simplified explanation, but the overall principles still hold true. Everyone is working under different conditions, so things like temperature, cleanliness, and machining can all affect that friction constant. This leads to a large range of required torque specs, which in turn can affect the integrity of the assembly, your oil clearances, and other characteristics. If a manufacturer specifies a specific lubrication, that friction constant is much more predictable so the torque applied can be more accurately determined. That's why lubrication is applied to the high friction areas of the fastener, the threads, and the bottom face of the head. With the lubrication applied, we can torque down the connecting rod fasteners. Make sure to incrementally increase the torque on both sides so the bearing cap goes down evenly. When we're tightening or loosening these fasteners, make sure that the tool is perpendicular to the crankshaft. This will keep it from spinning and causing damage since there's no lubrication. After it's torqued to the recommended spec, loosen the fasteners and remove the connecting rod cap. The plastic gauge shows that the oil clearance is within tolerance, so now we can clean it one more time and apply assembly lube. Follow the same recommended torque specs and tighten the fasteners. Now we follow the same process for the rest of the pistons. Make sure to pay attention to the alignment of the pistons and your markings so they're orientated correctly and in the correct cylinder the rings were gapped for. With the pistons assembled, turn the crank a couple times and make sure nothing's damaging the cylinder walls. That wraps up the piston installation. Thanks for watching, and take care.